Hello, today's poem we're considering is London by William Blake. Before we start, if you haven't yet subscribed to our channel, it would be greatly appreciated if you would. Thank you so much. I have the poem here, so let's start. I wander through each chartered street, near where the chartered Thames does flow, and mark in every face I meet marks of weakness, marks of woe. In every cry of every man, in every infant's cry of fear, in every voice, in every ban, the mind-forged manacles I hear. How the chimney sweepers cry, every blackening church appalls, and the hapless soldier's sigh runs in blood down palace walls. But most through midnight streets I hear how the youthful harlot's curse blasts the newborn infant's tear and blights with plagues the marriage hearse. This is one of William Blake's most famous poems, and there's a lot here to unpack, so let's start. The speaker walks the 18th century streets of London and recounts the misery he observes. He walks London's chartered streets. Chartered means the streets appear on charts, maps, but the second meaning is licensed, those streets where people are legally allowed. This raises the theme of restriction. Even the River Thames is chartered, meaning mapped, but also its natural flow is restrained because only those possessing permits are allowed its use, for example, traders and ferrymen. Through being chartered, a natural resource like the river is now restricted and prisoner to rules and regulations. So stanza 1 establishes the setting and the theme of restriction. The use of chartered may allude to Thomas Paine's Rights of Man, a book that supported the principles of the French Revolution, 1789. In it, Paine remarks, "Every chartered town is an aristocratical monopoly of itself." Paine says that the way a city is laid out and organised reflects the imbalance of power between the ruling class and the ruled, because such elites decide who can travel where in the city. They also get the nicest places to live. And it's almost certain that William Blake had read Thomas Paine's work and was influenced by it. Therefore, the first two lines introduce the theme of restriction and lack of freedom, where people must conform, are only allowed in the chartered streets and not in the private areas of the powerful and rich. Wander suggests the speaker is lost in the sheer volume of so much misery. It also suggests that wherever he walks, he will encounter misery and restriction. The stanza concludes with the speaker describing the faces of the people he meets in the streets. And mark in every face I meet marks of weakness, marks of woe. Mark, repeated 3 times, has different meanings. Mark in every face is a verb, meaning to note and observe in every face. Then mark is used as a noun, the marks on the faces of the people he sees of living a wretched life in London, possibly fatigue, malnourishment and disease, as well as worry and despair. The speaker observes their weakness and their woe. Here, weakness could mean physical weakness because people are malnourished, and it could mean a moral weakness, that people are engaged in unlawful and immoral activity. Woe reflects their misery and unhappiness. Being written in the first person voice creates a personal account of what the speaker observes. Blake lived in this period, and it is reasonable to assume that speaker and poet are the same. In the first 3 lines of stanza 2, the poet employs anaphora, a rhetorical device that repeats in every cry of every man, in every infant's cry of fear, in every voice, in every ban. This device emphasises the universal misery the speaker witnesses. It is everywhere he goes. Ban means a law or restriction. The stanza uses the sense of sound to build a 3-dimensional image of London. The sound of misery is highlighted in Blake's use of an acrostic, where the first letter of each line spells here. His ears are filled with the sounds of despair and oppression. Cry is repeated twice to stress the misery surrounding him. The opposites, man and infants, stress the universal misery experienced from birth to adulthood. The particular misery of children is developed in stanzas 3 and 4. So this is a stanza revolving around the sense of hearing. He adds the imaginary clanking of manacles, chains, people carry through their lives. These manacles are of the mind, figurative, not literal, but as repressive. They have been forged, created in people's minds. The alliteration created in the shared mind-forged manacles makes the message memorable and creates a linking like the links of a chain. This allusion to chains is strengthened in the use of enjambment, run-on lines, between the last line of the stanza that ends in here and the first line of the 3rd stanza, how the chimney sweepers cry. This lends a flowing quality, suggesting, like water flows down the Thames, human misery flows through the streets. The speaker suggests it is not only exterior forces that restrict people, but their lack of confidence or opportunities for education. The poor and oppressed have been raised from infancy to believe that they are inferior to their so-called betters and cannot improve their situation. It has the same effect as dragging real chains around. Reference to chains implies the poor are enslaved, or London is a giant prison where opportunities for escape and self-improvement are limited. In stanza 3, Blake moves from an abstract discussion of oppression to present us with vignettes of the people he meets in the streets. These figures provide concrete examples to support his theme. Firstly, he chooses the child chimney sweeper. How the chimney sweepers cry, every blackening church appalls, and the hapless soldier's sigh runs in blood down palace walls. Blake repeats cry again to intensify his theme of human suffering. Blackening refers to the chimney sweeper covered in soot and lethal coal dust, and juxtaposes this image with the church. Church is capitalised because Blake uses metonymy, where a word represents a concept, group of people or organisation. Church is used to represent religion, which the speaker believes does little to help the chimney sweeper, yet should be practising what it preaches and care for him. Appalls means the speaker is appalled, shocked at the church's indifference. But Blake also plays on pall, a pun meaning the cloth spread over a coffin, and a second meaning a dark cloud of smoke or dust. Blake suggests the church is responsible for child labourers' deaths because it is indifferent to their plight and does nothing to help them. Blackening suggests a child smeared in soot, but symbolises the sinfulness of the church for allowing child exploitation. Then Blake presents a soldier. And the hapless soldier's sigh runs in blood down palace walls. Hapless means unfortunate. Sigh again introduces another sound to this cacophony of suffering. In the same way, the child prostitute, whom we encounter in stanza 4, is forced to sell her body to survive. The soldier has sold his body, his labour. He has been forced by a lack of other opportunities to enlist in the army. The soldier will serve and will die for the king, represented through the metonym palace, which stands for the king and monarchy. The soldier's sighs are brought to life through sibilance, the repetition of the S sound. And the hapless soldier's sigh runs in blood down palace walls. The blood running down palace walls refers to the French Revolution taking place across the Channel, where King Louis XVI was beheaded the year before this poem was written. The poet makes the point that unlike revolutionary France, the people of England are still chained metaphorically and forced into servitude to their king and the old system he represents. And it is rather this, the soldier's blood fighting for the king, that runs down palace walls rather than that of the monarchy, the king himself. London, therefore, contrasts starkly with Paris, where, for a time, the French Revolution had removed its monarchy, given the oppressed a voice, and promoted equality for all. Blake makes the point that unlike Paris and France, the people of London and England are still oppressed. The preceding 3 stanzas have been building up to the final stanza. But most through midnight streets I hear how the youthful harlot's curse blasts the newborn infant's tear and blights with plagues the marriage hearse. Midnight may refer to when the speaker walks the streets, but also suggests danger and moral darkness. The lines use a T sound throughout, but most midnight streets, harlots, blasts, infants, tear and blights. These combine to form sharp stabbing sounds that create a fearful mood and sense of impending danger. The speaker hears a child prostitute, youthful harlot, curse, meaning swear, at her newborn, and rather than offer comfort, she blasts, screams at it. This hyperbole intensifies the girl's screaming at her baby. Blake demonstrates how this unfair system renders what should be a happy time for mother and baby is, through poverty, turned into something fearful and unnatural. We fear for the child's welfare and assume that it will have very limited prospects and opportunities through life. And blights with plagues the marriage hearse. Blake finishes the poem with a graphic image. Instead of being critical of the young prostitute and moralising, he feels sympathy because he understands she has been forced into this lifestyle by necessity and the need to survive. Blake uses a string of negative emotive words, blights, plagues and hearse. The marriage hearse. The oxymoron marriage hearse underlines the young harlot's predicament. Blake highlights the terrible situation she is in and why she curses her child. Firstly, having lost her innocence, virginity, will mar her prospects of marrying. In Blake's time, most women had to marry to gain some financial security in order to raise children. However, her prostitution blights, ruins any prospect of her leading a happy married life. In Blake's time, she would have been considered immoral and the spreader of deathly disease. Plague implies that she will likely have caught venereal disease or syphilis, and if she met a man who would marry her or did not know of her past, he would certainly catch the disease from her. These diseases were rarely curable and deadly. Hence, marriage hearse. For these reasons, the harlot knows she has little prospect of bettering her life. There is also the practicality of the child being another mouth to feed when she can barely support herself, and its presence will stop her from earning money for a while. We really fear for the baby's future and for its mother too. The repetition of cry in stanza 2, first line, and stanza 3, third line, and woe, weakness, manacles, curse, tear creates a mood of despair and melancholy. Although Blake deeply cares for the plight of the oppressed, the poem's mostly measured rhythm and rhyming pattern make the speaker appear initially detached from what he sees. Perhaps Blake, the artist, sees it his duty to remain objective, detached, and record what he witnesses through his art to bring about reform. Yet he cannot remain detached for long. This is represented in the metrical shift of line 4. Up until now, the meter has been a regular iambic tetrameter, creating the sense of somebody walking at a regular pace. This rhythm is broken in line 4, which begins with a trochee to make the marks sudden and imposing, and missing a syllable, it has 7 instead of 8. This changing meter reflects the way that the pained faces of the Londoners have impeded and imposed upon the speaker's steady pace, causing the speaker to stumble. And mark in every face I meet marks of weakness, marks of woe. Like many of Blake's poems, children feature strongly, and he even wrote a separate poem about the plight of a chimney sweeper. Chimney sweeping was a terrible trade. Small children, scrawny through malnourishment, were chosen to climb up chimney flues, risking being trapped and suffocating, or inhaling coal dust, leading to lung disease and early death. Blake champions the rights of children to lead a life of innocence and not experience the world's indifference and the cruelty of human nature prematurely. He sympathises with the young girl's loss of innocence, forced into a life of prostitution and exploitation. Although Blake did not believe in organised religion, he was spiritual and cared deeply for society's underprivileged. London comes from Blake's best known work, Songs of Innocence and Experience, and follows a simple rhyme scheme throughout, A-B, A-B. All of the rhymes are full, perfect rhymes as well. The overwhelming, steady, unchanging rhyme scheme helps the poem feel like a walk. Just like a pair of feet, one rhyme is laid down after another. Using rhyme makes the poem's important points memorable. Like much of Blake's work, the poem is full of opposites. Childhood versus adulthood, life versus death, freedom versus imprisonment, London versus Paris, creating a pervading sense of conflict. It challenges readers to reflect on their position in society and their responsibility for the welfare of others. London challenges us to assess if we are an exploiter or one of the exploited. And if we dismiss the notion of ourselves as exploiters, consider who made our latest smartphone, or clothing, or how the food and drinks we buy were produced and by whom. Blake's poem is as relevant today as it was in 1794. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you found it interesting and helpful. If so, please hit the like button below. Also, check out our other videos on writing and textual analysis. If you haven't done so yet, it would be greatly appreciated if you'd subscribe to our channel. Many thanks. Until next time, from Carol and me, write well.